No one remembered Lin Shuyin's face after the selection ceremony. They remembered the general's daughter who cried beautifully. They remembered the minister's niece whose smile lingered like perfume. They remembered the silk merchant's girl who fainted at exactly the right moment. Cheyenne passed through the hall like a shadow slipping between pillars. Her name was announced last, spoken softly, as if even the eunuch felt it was unnecessary effort. Lin Shuyin, 17, daughter of Lin Zhen, grain registrar of Yang Prefecture. There was a pause. Not because anyone cared, but because the eunuch had to check whether he had read it correctly. Grain registrar, not even a full official, no military rank, no political weight. The examiner glanced at her once. She was plain in the way that invited forgetfulness. Her eyes were lowered, her posture careful but not elegant, her expression calm to the point of dullness. She wore no excessive jewelry, only a jade hairpin so old it had been polished thin by time. "What skills do you possess?" the examiner asked, already half distracted. Cheyenne knelt and bowed. "I can read basic texts, I so passably, I am obedient." That was the safest answer. No one pressed further. By dusk, she was assigned a low rank and sent to the far eastern edge of the inner palace, to a residence that had once belonged to a concubine who died quietly and was never spoken of again. The Jade Hall. A name far grander than the building deserved. When the doors closed behind her, Cheyenne exhaled slowly. This was not victory. This was survival. The palace was a market. Most women believed the inner palace was ruled by beauty and favor. Cheyenne knew better. It was ruled by resources. Who received silk first? Who waited for medicine? Who ate fresh rice and who ate leftovers dried twice over? Power did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it moved through kitchens, storerooms, and supply lists written by bored clerks who never expected consequences. That was where Cheyenne had grown up. Before the palace, her father's office had been small, cramped, and endlessly noisy. Merchants argued, farmers complained, clerks groaned over numbers, officials drank tea and pretended not to notice missing grain. Cheyenne had sat in the corner with embroidery she rarely finished, listening. Men forgot girls existed when they spoke of money. "That road can't support that volume," one merchant said once. "It can if you declare the loss as spoilage," another replied casually. "The tax quota increased again," a clerk muttered. "Only on paper," came the response, "the rest is flexible." Words piled up in her mind like beads on a string. She learned without teachers. She learned that shortages were manufactured. She learned that losses were negotiated. She learned that numbers lied, but patterns did not. By 14, she could predict grain prices before they rose. By 16, she understood why officials feared auditors more than bandits. Her father never noticed. He only noticed that his ledgers balanced more easily when she helped copy them. Entering the Jade Hall. The Jade Hall smelled faintly of damp stone and old incense. A single senior maid supervised her arrival, her gaze sharp and dismissive. "You'll receive your monthly allocations tomorrow," the maid said. "Don't cause trouble, don't ask questions, don't imagine you matter." Cheyenne bowed. "Yes." The maid left satisfied. That night, Cheyenne lay awake on a narrow bed, listening to palace sounds, the distant clang of gates, the soft footsteps of patrols, the murmur of servants moving goods from one place to another. Movement meant value. Value meant opportunity. She smiled faintly in the dark. The first test. On the third day, the test arrived disguised as routine. A ledger was placed before her. "Account for your residence's supplies," the senior maid ordered. "Silk, oil, rice, candles, monthly standard." Cheyenne stared at the numbers. She frowned. She counted on her fingers. Once. Twice. Then she hesitated. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "I was never good with numbers." The maid's expression shifted instantly, from suspicion to contempt. "Useless," she muttered, scribbling a note. "No wonder you were sent here." Cheyenne miscalculated deliberately. By just enough to be obvious. The maid left convinced she had correctly assessed her. That night, Cheyenne replayed the ledger in her mind. She corrected every figure. Noted every inflation. Mapped every route. 3 layers of skimming. 2 artificial delays. 1 monopoly controlling lamp oil deliveries. Interesting. Very interesting. Silence as strategy. Shuyin did not act immediately. That was the difference between clever people and survivors. If she exposed corruption, she would gain attention and enemies. If she altered incentives quietly, the system would correct itself without knowing why. The next day, she asked a kitchen maid an innocent question. Why does the oil smell different lately? The maid complained for nearly an hour. By the end, Shuyin knew the name of every merchant involved. That night she adjusted nothing directly. She sent a single message through a chain of servants, favors, and overlooked relationships, barely a whisper in the market. Oil arrived earlier the next week. Cheaper. Cleaner. No one knew why. Somewhere else in the palace, a minister frowned at a report. The numbers don't match, he said. Someone is interfering. The emperor glanced up briefly. Find them. That same evening he passed the Jade Hall. Inside, Lin Shuyin practiced calligraphy poorly on purpose, her strokes uneven, her posture slightly wrong. The emperor did not stop. He thought vaguely that concubine again, and forgot her the moment he turned away. Shuyin dipped her brush again. Let them search. The inner palace woke before the sun. Servants moved like currents through water, silent, practiced, unseen unless they failed. By the time the concubines stirred, fires had been lit, rice washed, lamps refilled, and complaints buried beneath obedience. Shuyin woke early as well. She had learned long ago that those who moved first controlled the day. She sat by the window of the Jade Hall listening, the faint clatter of buckets, the rustle of silk slippers, the soft curses of overworked kitchen hands. Every sound carried information if one listened carefully enough. Today the oil would arrive. Or it would not. The shortage that was natural. The palace had been murmuring for weeks. Lamp oil burned too quickly, it smoked, it smelled wrong. Kitchens complained of delayed deliveries while storerooms reported mysterious shortfalls that never quite rose to the level of scandal. Shortages were common. Artificial shortages were profitable. Shuyin had confirmed it quietly, through overheard conversations, discarded receipts. A servant who talked too much when offered warm tea. 3 merchant families controlled nearly all lamp oil supplied to the palace. They rotated delays, blamed weather, and inflated prices in elegant turns. They were careful. But careful men grew lazy when they believed no one important was watching. A question asked softly. Shuyin chose the kitchen. Not the head cook too guarded. Not the purchasing clerk too frightened. She chose a scullery maid named Aziu, whose hands were cracked and whose tongue was loose from exhaustion. The oil smells sharp lately, Shuyin said casually, helping her scrub pots. Is it a different supplier? Aziu snorted. Different? No, same greedy pigs. They say the river is blocked again. Funny how it only blocks when prices are about to rise. Shuyin hummed as if uninterested. Isn't the Southern Canal still open? It is, but the contracts, Aziu leaned closer, voice dropping. They don't let others bid. Someone in the ministry signed exclusivity. Shuyin nodded slowly. Exclusivity was merely monopoly wearing silk robes. How money really moves. That afternoon Shuyin sent a gift. Not to an official. To a clerk's mother. A small basket of dried persimmons delivered with polite anonymity. The message was simple: your son works too hard, may his burdens lighten. No threats. No demands. Only a reminder that someone knew where effort was being expended. The next morning, a minor form was processed unusually fast. A backup supplier, long ignored, was approved for a partial delivery in case of emergency. The palace had emergencies every day. When oil arrives early, the delivery came 3 days ahead of schedule. The oil was clear, it burned clean, it was cheaper by nearly 1/3. The kitchens noticed first. This batch is good, the head cook muttered suspiciously. Too good. The storeroom clerk checked the seals twice. No irregularities. No explanation. The monopolists panicked. They lowered prices, blamed miscalculations, offered sudden discounts to maintain control. Too late. Once an alternative existed, their grip loosened. Markets were fragile like that. Ripples in the court. Reports reached the outer court quietly. Lamp oil expenditures have decreased, a minister said, confused. Without any change in quotas, another added, impossible. The emperor listened with mild interest. Trace it, he ordered, someone is adjusting supply chains without authorization. His tone was not angry. It was curious. That was more dangerous. The concubines react. Within the inner palace, whispers spread. The kitchens favor someone, one concubine sneered. Supplies arrive faster near the east wing, another muttered. Someone's currying favor behind the scenes. They began to watch each other more closely. They did not watch Shuyin. She still miscounted her allocations. Still wore plain robes. Still bowed too low. When a senior maid scolded her for wasting oil, she apologized profusely. The maid left feeling superior. Shuyin made a note in her head. A rule of survival. That night Shuyin reviewed the palace as if it were a living ledger. Input. Output. Leakage. Pressure points. Oil was only the beginning. Grain, medicine, silk, incense, labor. Each had a monopoly somewhere. Each monopoly believed itself untouchable. They were wrong. The emperor passes again. The emperor passed the Jade Hall that evening. He noticed the lamps burning steady and bright. Better oil, he remarked idly. Yes, your majesty, a eunuch replied, cheaper too it seems. The emperor paused for half a breath. Find out why. Inside, Shuyin was mending a sleeve, pricking her finger deliberately to appear clumsy. A drop of blood stained the fabric. She sucked it quietly and smiled. Let them search. She had not broken a single rule. She had merely allowed the palace to breathe more efficiently. Silence deepens. Power did not announce itself with trumpets. It arrived early. It cost less. It solved problems before they became complaints. By the time people noticed, it was already indispensable. Shuyin extinguished her lamp and lay down. Tomorrow she would listen to the grain accounts. And the palace would move again. Grain was louder than oil. Oil arrived quietly, burned quietly, and disappeared quietly. Grain, however, left footprints everywhere, sacks dragged across stone, arguments in storerooms, complaints from cooks, whispered curses when bowls were half filled. If oil taught Shuyin how money flowed, grain would teach her how power broke. She began by listening. The sound of missing rice. The Jade Hall received its grain allotment on the 7th day of the month. 2 sacks fewer than listed. The storeroom clerk frowned, scratched his head and shrugged. Transport loss, he said automatically. Shuyin nodded as if satisfied. That evening she ate slowly, counting grains with her eyes. Loss ratios were consistent, too consistent. Natural spoilage varied, human theft followed patterns. A lesson from her father. Her father's voice returned to her memory. Grain doesn't vanish, he had once said, drunk and bitter, it just changes hands. Shuyin had been 14 then, copying numbers she wasn't meant to understand. She understood now. Weights that lied. The palace used standardized weights, bronze measures stamped with imperial seals. They were supposed to be sacred. They weren't. Shuyin noticed that the measuring vessels in the east storeroom were subtly thinner than regulation, barely enough to be noticed, enough to siphon thousands of jinn over a year. She asked no questions. Instead, she offered tea to the junior clerk responsible for inventory. Your handwriting is very neat, she said sincerely. The clerk flushed. Men starved for recognition talked easily. By the end of the tea, Shuyin knew which supervisor approved the altered weights and which official received the excess grain through a shell account registered under a temple. Elegant. Criminal. The false choice. Exposing them would be easy. Surviving the exposure would not. Shuyin chose a third path. She arranged for one shipment to be weighed with a correct measure. Just one. The discrepancy exploded. Suddenly, records didn't match. Accusations flew, supervisors blamed clerks blamed transport teams, everyone panicked. In panic, people made mistakes. Mistakes created trails. When numbers start talking. Within days, the Ministry of Revenue noticed inconsistencies. These losses exceed expected variance, a deputy minister said sharply. Then where is the grain? Another demanded. The answer was uncomfortable. The emperor was informed. He frowned. Someone corrected a measure, he said slowly. Who? No one knew. That disturbed him more than theft ever had. Inside the Jade Hall, Shuyin pretended to be frightened. Why are officials inspecting the storerooms? She asked a maid nervously. Did something go wrong? The maid scoffed. Nothing you need worry about, it's men stealing from men. Exactly, Shuyin thought. The cost of honesty. The altered weights were confiscated. The supervisor was demoted. The official behind the temple account quietly retired. No announcement was made. Grain portions increased slightly across the inner palace. Concubines noticed. They praised the emperor's benevolence. The emperor did not feel benevolent. He felt watched. A pattern emerges. Oil. Grain. Two monopolies weakened, two systems corrected without revolt or scandal. The emperor summoned his most trusted financial advisor. This is not coincidence, he said. Someone understands incentives, not just corruption. The advisor hesitated. Someone trained in economics, he said finally, using a foreign term from a banned text. The emperor's eyes narrowed. In my palace. A woman who wasn't looked at. That night the emperor attended a minor banquet. Shuyin was seated far from him, quiet and forgettable. She misused her chopsticks slightly. The emperor's gaze passed over her without stopping. She lowered her eyes. Markets were stabilizing. Officials were nervous. And the most dangerous person in the palace was still considered a fool who couldn't count. Shuyin smiled faintly into her rice. The first tax petition arrived wrapped in red silk. That alone was unusual. Red silk was reserved for matters of celebration or crisis. Taxes were neither. They were supposed to be dull, predictable, invisible numbers that flowed upward without friction. The emperor noticed immediately. He did not open it at once. He set it aside and finished reading two other memorials first, as if testing whether the silk itself would change the meaning of what lay inside. It did not. The figures were wrong. Not outrageously wrong, not enough to accuse anyone outright, but wrong in a way that suggested intelligence rather than greed. The emperor leaned back, eyes narrowing slightly. Someone was touching the system again. In the inner palace, Shuyin was threading a needle with deliberate slowness. Her hands trembled just enough to appear clumsy. The maid watching her sighed impatiently and turned away, already bored. That was the advantage of appearing useless. No one noticed when useless people listened. Taxes were more delicate than grain or oil. Grain fed mouths, oil lit rooms, taxes fed the state itself. Change them too visibly and ministers screamed, change them subtly and they adjusted without understanding why. Shuyin had spent weeks listening before acting. She listened to eunuchs complaining about bribes that grew heavier each year. She listened to clerks muttering about prefectures that always met quotas despite drought. She listened to merchants who grumbled about paying twice, once officially, once privately. The story was old. The structure was rotten. The problem with taxes was not theft. It was distortion. When officials extracted too much, farmers hid grain. When quotas were unrealistic, numbers became fiction. When numbers became fiction, policy was made blind. Shuyin did not correct the theft. She corrected the lies. It began with a suggestion that was never traced to her. A minor tax clerk, one who had once complained near the Jade Hall while delivering documents, received an unsigned note. Declare what is collected, not what is demanded. The difference will protect you. He laughed when he read it. Then he thought. Then he tried it for one prefecture. The numbers shocked him. They were lower. But they were stable. Within a month, 3 prefectures reported unexpectedly consistent tax flows. No shortages, no surplus excuses, no emergency petitions. Just steady, honest figures. That terrified the ministers more than theft ever had. The emperor noticed. These prefectures, he said during court, tapping the memorials, why are they suddenly accurate? No one answered. Accuracy had become suspicious. Shuyin heard about the court discussion from a maid who loved gossip. His Majesty was displeased, the maid whispered. He said someone is teaching officials to lie differently. Shuyin nearly smiled. Different lies were closer to truth. She moved carefully. For every honest report, she allowed two distorted ones to continue. Balance was necessary, sudden purity invited investigation. Instead, she altered incentives again. Clerks who reported realistically were quietly spared audits. Clerks who inflated figures faced sudden inspections. No one announced the rule. People learned it anyway. The tax system began to bend. Not break. Not reform. Bend. In the outer court, tension thickened. "We are losing control of projections," a senior minister snapped. "Someone is interfering without authority." The emperor listened silently. He remembered the oil. The grain. Now this. A pattern formed in his mind. Not rebellion. Optimization. That disturbed him more than open corruption ever could. That night he walked the inner palace alone. He passed familiar halls, glanced at familiar faces, received rehearsed bows. Then he passed the Jade Hall. Light spilled through the paper windows, steady, clean, without smoke. He stopped. Inside, Shuyin was copying a poem slowly, her characters uneven, her brow furrowed as if concentrating too hard on simple strokes. The emperor watched for a long moment. She did not notice him. Or pretended not to. He turned away, unsettled by a thought he did not yet understand. In the Jade Hall, Shuyin exhaled only after his footsteps faded. Taxes were dangerous territory. She had stepped onto it anyway. Because power did not belong only to those who demanded it loudly. It belonged to those who understood how systems survived pressure. And now the empire was breathing differently. Quietly. Because of her. The monopolies did not collapse quietly. They never did. When oil had slipped through their fingers, they blamed weather. When grain balances shifted, they blamed careless clerks. When taxes began behaving strangely, they understood something far more dangerous was happening. Someone was changing the rules. And people who lived off rules noticed immediately when the ground moved beneath them. The first counterattack came disguised as generosity. A new batch of lamp oil arrived at the palace, cheaper than ever, accompanied by gifts, fine incense, polished lamps, even a pair of singing birds meant for the emperor's private courtyard. The merchants bowed deeply, proclaiming loyalty and repentance. The emperor accepted none of it. "Too sudden," he said flatly, "they're frightened." Frightened men were unpredictable. In the inner palace, Shuyin heard about the gifts before the emperor did. Servants talked. "They're trying to win favor back," a eunuch whispered. "They'll succeed," another replied. "They always do." Shuyin said nothing. She adjusted her sleeve and misstepped deliberately, spilling tea on her own robe. The maid scolded her. Shuyin apologized. And the monopolies prepared their real strike. They targeted what they thought was weakest. The East Wing. Specifically the Jade Hall. Not because they suspected Shuyin, but because the Jade Hall sat closest to the kitchens, storerooms, and servant corridors where recent changes had originated. Coincidence, they told themselves. Still, coincidence was enough. An anonymous complaint reached the inner palace administration. Supplies are being manipulated, certain residences receive preferential treatment. No names. No proof. But enough to justify inspection. The senior maids descended like hawks. Allocations were recounted, storage seals checked, servants interrogated. Shuyin stood quietly while her residence was inspected. She miscounted again. On purpose. The inspector shook her head dismissively. "This one," she said aloud, "she can barely read numbers." The file was closed. But the inspection served its purpose. Fear spread. Servants stopped talking, clerks refused favors, minor suppliers backed away, terrified of being implicated. The palace began to tighten. Efficiency slowed. The monopoly smiled. That night Shuyin sat alone in the dark. This was expected. Systems resisted change the way bodies resisted illness, by attacking anything unfamiliar. She had two choices now. Retreat. Or escalate. She chose neither. She redirected. The monopolies relied on two things. Control of contracts. Fear of retaliation. Contracts could be rewritten. Fear could be transferred. Shuyin found the weakest link, a second-tier merchant family excluded from the oil monopoly, bitter and ambitious. She did not contact them. She let them over here. A careless eunuch complained loudly in a tea house near the outer wall. They say the emperor favors competition now, cheaper goods, cleaner supply chains. The words traveled faster than silver. Within weeks petitions arrived. New merchants requesting access, offering better prices, claiming loyalty. The monopolies panicked. They threatened officials. Officials, sensing imperial scrutiny, began distancing themselves. Fear shifted. In the outer court, arguments erupted. If we deny them, we appear corrupt. If we accept them, we anger existing partners. Someone is forcing our hand. The emperor listened and smiled faintly for the first time in months. In the inner palace, the consequences were immediate. Supplies stabilized again. Not perfectly, but better. Shuyin allowed herself one cup of tea that night, hot, fragrant, unhurried. She had made enemies. They did not know her name. That was the point. The next morning, the emperor summoned his intelligence chief. I want to know who is doing this, he said quietly, not to punish them. The chief hesitated. Then why, Your Majesty? The emperor's gaze hardened. Because anyone who can destabilize monopolies without bloodshed should not remain a mystery. Shuyin learned of the summons by sunset. Her fingers tightened slightly around her needle. Searchers meant proximity. Proximity meant risk. She pricked her finger, this time not on purpose. A drop of blood fell onto the cloth. She stared at it calm. Enemies had noticed. Now the hunter was moving. And for the first time since entering the palace, Lin Shuyin understood something clearly. Silence alone would no longer protect her. The emperor changed tactics. When a ruler failed to find an enemy through force, he searched through pattern. In patterns unlike people could not lie. The order was simple. Map every recent efficiency gain, the emperor said. Oil, grain, taxes, compare timelines, locations, personnel. No accusations. No arrests. Only observation. It was the most dangerous kind of command. In the Jade Hall, Shuyin felt the shift before she heard of it. Servants moved differently, slower, more cautious. Conversations died mid-sentence. Deliveries arrived exactly on time, not early, not late. Perfect systems were unnatural. Perfect systems meant fear. The intelligence chief worked methodically. He ignored loud concubines, ambitious ministers, and obvious beneficiaries. He looked instead at who was never questioned. Changes always radiated outward from somewhere. Oil complaints had stopped first near the kitchens. Grain accuracy had begun in the east storerooms. Tax consistency had followed routes passing through the inner palace. The center was narrowing. One name appeared repeatedly in reports. Not as a suspect. As an absence. Lin Shuyin. She never requested favors. Never complained. Never benefited directly. Her name surfaced only in allocation records marked standard and incident notes marked irrelevant. Irrelevant too many times became relevant. The emperor received the analysis silently. This concubine, he said slowly, what do we know of her? Nothing, the chief replied, which is unusual. The emperor nodded. Bring me your household records. Shuyin was mending robes when the summons arrived. A eunuch bowed stiffly. Concubine Lin, His Majesty requests a record review of your household. Not an audience. Worth. Records meant digging. Shuyin bowed and thanked him. Her pulse remained steady. Panic wasted time. That night she reviewed her own trail. No letters. No signatures. No direct commands. Only incentives adjusted. Only whispers released. But people were now watching for the shape of her influence. She needed distance. Distance came through obedience. The next day Shuyin made mistakes. Visible ones. She misaddressed a senior maid. She spilled ink on an allocation sheet. She failed to calculate even a simple division correctly. The maids reported it eagerly. Truly foolish, one said, she barely understands basic accounts. The reports reached the intelligence office and slowed the investigation. But the emperor was not convinced. He requested to see her. Not formally. Casually. The meeting was unannounced. Shuyin was arranging flowers when the emperor entered the Jade Hall courtyard. She dropped into a bow so deep her forehead nearly touched stone. "Rise," he said. She obeyed, eyes lowered. He studied her quietly. She was plainer up close, no sharp ambition, no practiced allure, just stillness. "What were you doing?" he asked. "Arranging flowers," she replied. He pointed to a stem she had placed awkwardly. "That one is crooked." "I don't have a good eye," she said softly. "I'm sorry." "A lie." "A small one." He walked slowly around the courtyard. "Do you like palace life?" he asked. Shuyin paused, just long enough to appear thoughtful, not calculating. "I am grateful," she said. "I try not to think too much." The emperor stopped. Not thinking was a privilege of those without responsibility, or a disguise worn by those with too much. He turned to face her fully. "Tell me, concubine Lin," he said, voice calm, "do you understand numbers?" Her heart did not race. She had prepared for this question since the oil arrived early. She lowered her head. "I find them confusing," she said honestly enough. "They never stay where I put them." The emperor watched her for a long moment. Then he laughed softly, a sound no one in the Jade Hall had ever heard. "Very well," he said, "return to your flowers." He left without another word. The intelligence chief waited later that night. "Well?" he asked. The emperor poured tea slowly. "She is either a fool," he said, "or the most disciplined mind in my palace." "And which do you believe?" The emperor smiled faintly. "I intend to find out." In the Jade Hall, Shuyin finally allowed her hands to shake. Just a little. She had survived the first close look. But survival was no longer enough. The emperor had seen the possibility. And possibility, once noticed, was never forgotten. The emperor's attention changed the palace climate overnight. It was not announced. It was not explained. But servants sensed it the way animals sensed storms, by shifts in pressure, by silences that lingered too long. The Jade Hall became visible. Not important. Not favored. Observed. Shuyin adapted immediately. Observation was not danger by itself. Reaction was. The first sign came through medicine. A minor epidemic swept the servants' quarters: fever, coughing, weakness, nothing dramatic, nothing fatal, enough to slow labor and disrupt supply timing. Normally medicine arrived late. This time it arrived fast. Too fast. Someone was testing response systems. Shuyin understood the message clearly. "Show me how you move things," the emperor was saying without words. She could not retreat. If systems failed now, suspicion would return sharper than before. If they succeeded too cleanly, she would expose herself. Balance was everything. She chose decentralization. Instead of directing medicine from one source, she let 3 different channels respond. A temple infirmary was quietly encouraged to donate surplus herbs. A disgraced physician was given a chance to redeem himself by serving the servants. A merchant with unsold stock received a sudden order, small enough not to attract attention. No single hand guided it. No single pattern emerged. The medicine arrived. Just in time. The intelligence office noted it. Response was faster than expected, a clerk reported, but diffuse. The emperor read the report. Diffuse meant intelligence. Meanwhile, monopolies struck again. This time through silk. Silk quotas were adjusted subtly, deliveries delayed by a day here, 2 days there, not enough to cause outrage, just enough to cause discomfort. The Jade Hall received rougher bolts than usual. A test. Shuyin accepted the silk without complaint. She wore it publicly. Let them think they were winning. Then she changed something else. She shifted labor. A group of underpaid weavers, long excluded from palace contracts, received sudden, small orders routed through intermediaries. No exclusivity, no favoritism, just access. The quality improved. The price dropped. The monopolists noticed too late. Inside the court, tempers flared. "These disruptions are intentional," a silk official argued. "Someone is opening doors that were closed for good reason." "For whose reason?" the emperor asked mildly. Silence followed. Shuyin learned something important that week. The emperor was no longer searching blindly. He was circling. The trap came disguised as praise. A senior maid visited the Jade Hall with unusual politeness. His Majesty has noticed your obedience, she said. He wishes to reward it. Reward meant exposure. Shuyin bowed. I don't deserve it. You'll attend the upcoming economic briefing, the maid continued, merely to observe. Observe economics. For a woman who claimed not to understand numbers. This was not curiosity. It was bait. That night Shuyin did not sleep. For the first time since entering the palace, she considered something dangerous. What if invisibility was no longer possible? What if survival now required partial truth? The briefing hall was crowded. Ministers, advisors, scholars. Shuyin sat at the back, silent, forgettable. Figures were presented. Projections argued. Assumptions repeated. They were wrong. Painfully wrong. She clenched her hands in her sleeves. Say nothing, she told herself. Say nothing. Then a scholar scoffed. These numbers are impossible without cheating. Whoever is doing this is destabilizing the empire. The emperor's gaze drifted, not to the scholar. To her. Shuyin felt it like heat. She raised her hand. Just slightly. Gasps followed. A low-ranking concubine speaking in a financial briefing was unheard of. Speak, the emperor said. Her heart hammered. This was the line. She crossed it carefully. Perhaps, she said softly, the numbers are not impossible, perhaps the assumptions are. The hall froze. She continued, voice trembling just enough. If you assume officials respond only to punishment, you will never predict honesty. But if you assume they respond to incentives. She stopped. Enough. The emperor finished the thought for her. Then systems change themselves. Silence. Then murmurs. The emperor smiled. Not with triumph. With recognition. Shuyin bowed deeply, hands shaking now for real. She had revealed herself. Not fully. But enough. There was no returning to silence. The silence after her words was heavier than accusation. Ministers who had argued moments earlier now studied the floor. Scholars who had scoffed stared at Shuyin as if she had spoken a forbidden language. A concubine, soft-voiced, low-ranked, had named the thing they all avoided admitting. Incentives. The emperor did not dismiss her. That alone changed everything. By evening, the court had chosen its reaction. Attack. The first petition accused her of impropriety. A woman interfering in state matters. A concubine overstepping her station. A dangerous precedent. The second accused her of manipulation. Supply disruptions linked to her residence. Suspicious efficiencies. Untraceable influence. The third was more subtle. If she understands economics, who taught her, whose agent is she? Fear always searched for a master behind the curtain. Shuyin learned of the petitions before dawn. A maid who owed her a favor wept while speaking. They want you removed from the palace, she whispered, quietly if possible. Shuyin nodded. This too was expected. When systems improved, those who fed on inefficiency starved. Starving men lashed out. She did not flee. Fleeing would confirm guilt. She did not plead. Pleading surrendered power. She waited. The emperor summoned her at noon. Not to the Jade Hall. To the Hall of Clear Governance. A place where concubines did not belong. She walked alone through corridors lined with officials who would not meet her eyes. Some looked relieved, some resentful, some afraid. She bowed before the throne. The emperor studied her without expression. You understand what they accuse you of, he said. Yes, Shuyin replied. And do you deny it? She paused. Denying everything would insult him. Admitting everything would destroy her. She chose precision. I deny disloyalty, she said. I deny selfish intent, I deny corruption. And the rest. I do not deny understanding systems. A murmur rippled through the hall. The emperor raised a hand, silence returned instantly. Why hide it, he asked. Because visibility is danger, Shuyin answered, and danger disrupts systems. A few officials stiffened. They understood the implication. The emperor leaned forward. You altered markets inside my palace, he said. You shifted monopolies, you changed tax behavior, you did this without authority. Yes. Why should I not punish you? Shuyin met his gaze for the first time. Because it worked, she said quietly, And because punishing me will not restore the old order, it will only teach the next person to hide better. The hall went still. That answer was dangerous. That answer was honest. The emperor exhaled slowly. You did not seek power, he said, yet you shaped it. I sought stability, Shuyin replied. Power followed. The ministers expected exile. Some expected execution. What they did not expect was the emperor's laughter, soft, incredulous, edged with something like relief. For years, he said, I have ruled an empire where everyone lies to preserve their position. And now a woman who claims she cannot count numbers teaches my officials to tell the truth because it benefits them. He looked at Shuyin. You are a problem, he said. Then after a pause. And a solution. The decree came swiftly. Shuyin would not be punished. She would not be promoted publicly either. Instead, she would be assigned an impossible role. Special internal advisor. Unannounced, unranked, unnamed in records. She would sit behind screens, read reports, ask questions no one could trace. The court erupted in outrage. The emperor silenced it with a single sentence. She will fix what you have failed to protect. That night Shuyin returned to the Jade Hall. Nothing looked different. Everything was. She was no longer invisible. She was something far more dangerous. Unclassifiable. She stood by the window and allowed herself one moment of exhaustion. Enemies watched her openly now. Allies would be cautious. The emperor's protection was real but conditional. She had traded silence for survival. And survival for responsibility. Shuyin closed her eyes. The empire had invited her to speak. Now she would teach it to listen. The empire did not change overnight. That was the first lesson Shuyin insisted upon. Systems that moved too fast broke. Systems that broke invited reaction. Reaction bred chaos, and chaos always punished those without armies. She had none. Her work began behind a screen. Literally. A lacquered screen was placed in the Hall of Clear Governance during select briefings. Ministers spoke as they always had, too loudly, too defensively, too certain of their own importance, while a quiet presence listened from the other side. Questions were passed to the emperor on slips of paper. Not commands. Not reforms. Questions. Why does this prefecture meet quotas during drought? Why does this monopoly require protection if it is efficient? Why do audits punish honesty faster than theft? Questions destabilized egos without drawing blood. The emperor learned quickly. So did the court. Resistance came in subtler forms now. Budgets were delayed. Reports were buried. Numbers were made deliberately confusing. Shuyin responded with patience. Confusion collapsed under clarity. She asked for comparisons across years. She asked for transport logs beside tax reports. She asked why 3 ministries used 3 definitions for the same loss. Ministers grew tired. Fatigue made truth cheaper than lies. The monopolies made their last attempt. They offered the emperor a choice. Stability for obedience. They would lower prices, smooth supply, and fund public works if the unnamed advisor disappeared. The emperor listened. Then he declined. Stability that requires silence is fragility, he said. The offer died. So did their influence. Shuyin never appeared in public again. That was deliberate. She understood something the court still struggled with. Visibility was power's enemy. Let them argue with shadows. Let them fear patterns. One evening, the emperor dismissed his attendants early. Only the screen remained. You could have taken a title, he said quietly, a ministry, a name. Names attract knives, Shuyin replied from behind the screen. Shadows attract caution. He smiled. You were meant to be a concubine. I was meant to be unnoticed, she corrected gently. A pause. And now? Now I am useful. He considered her words. For how long? As long as incentives align, she said, including mine. He laughed softly. You bargain even with emperors. I bargain for them, she replied. Outside the palace the effects spread. Farmers noticed quotas that no longer punished honesty. Merchants noticed competition that rewarded efficiency. Officials noticed that silence no longer protected incompetence. No proclamations announced reform. Life simply improved. Slowly. Believably. Years later, historians would argue. Some would credit the emperor's wisdom. Others would praise institutional reform. None would name Lin Shuyin. Her records remained thin. Her residence modest. Her life uncelebrated. Exactly as she intended. On her last night in the Jade Hall, Shuyin packed the same wooden box she had brought years before. The jade hairpin. The worn needle. Nothing else. The emperor watched from the doorway. "Will you be remembered?" he asked. She paused. "By systems," she said, "not by people." "That sounds lonely." She smiled. Efficiency often is. As she left the inner palace for the final time, not in disgrace, not in triumph, Shuyin felt no regret. She had not ruled. She had not conquered. She had understood. And understanding, quietly applied, had reshaped an empire without ever announcing itself. The court returned to noise behind her. The systems endured. And somewhere in the machinery of the state, truth moved a little more freely. Because once, a concubine had studied economics in silence. The end.
Thanks for tuning in to Hot Soup Stories. If you love audio stories, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your encouragement keeps our stories coming.